Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Through Their Eyes. My name is Marilyn Shannon, and I am here with my friends. And this podcast is for youth, young adults, and we are dedicated to talking about everything. And I welcome the opportunity for you to put your name under our video, enjoy our chat. You can ask questions in there, comment, just put your name, nickname, whatever you like in there and we will see your comment. You can call into the studio at 919-518-9773, or you can come in on Skype, and that would be computers, that's plural, then the number 2K voice. You'll come in on voice, not video. And so we do this show once a month. It is the second Monday in the month from 6 to 7, and we are live. So if you have a story to share, something that you want to offer, our audience of young adults and teens and families and parents, please do so. We are here making a difference. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh, who is our host. And we have one more host coming in tonight, Danielle. Hopefully she's at school, but she should be here soon. So Josh, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Marilyn. So I do really want to get straight into it. So introducing our special guest today, we're bringing on Ivy. They are non-binary, and so that honestly, it's better if I ask them what it means to them. But Ivy, to kick things right off, can you kind of just give us some background about you? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah. Hello, my name is Ivy. I go by they, them pronouns, and I am from Raleigh, North Carolina. A little bit about me. I identify as a non-binary person, which means that I don't, how do I say this? I don't really feel like a man or a woman, and that's okay. And it makes me really happy to know that I'm not confined by the binary of what a man should be, what a woman should be. I have, for those of you listening, I have eyeliner on one of my eyes instead of two. I feel like that's just a symbol that I can be whoever I want. And I don't know, it's
Yeah,
just a fun thing to
absolutely.
do.
Actually, to add on to that, Ivy, you brought up that you don't feel like you classify under a certain binary. Do you think you can elaborate on kind of things that made you realize that or what that means in general for people who might not know?
Mhm. So for the longest time, under this is likely because of European colonization or because of Christianity and its spread into the Americas. The gender binary has been forced on everybody. And so that is the norm. People think that you can only be a man or a woman, and there's no real space in between. But we are now realizing that that's entirely false. Non-binary people and people who have existed outside of the gender binary have existed since the dawn of time, going back to the River Valley civilization, going back to ancient Egypt, and we're here. And there's not really much we can do about it except accept our existence and move on. So I guess to start off with like what it exactly means and what led me to this conclusion, I realized that for a while, and this actually is true for a lot of trans people, um, there were a lot of things that I thought were normal and, things that regular cisgender men wanted to do. By the way, cisgender means people who identify with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So people who are assigned male at birth who identify as men, and people who are assigned female at birth who identify as women. Also, just quick aside, um, a lot of people believe that the word cis is like a slur. I've seen that online. I want you to know that it is not. It is not a slur. It's just merely an antonym for transgender. So just like how there are trans women, there are now cis women. You know,
Hmm.
we've always existed. We just have labels for it now. Okay,
Yeah.
so back to what I was saying. So, for instance, I always thought that like it would be so cool to be a woman. I thought it would be awesome if I was assigned female at birth. Turns out a lot of men don't think that. And that was something that took me a long time to realize because I just thought that, oh, yeah, every man would want to. Like, why wouldn't they? But then I realized maybe not. And same thing with my like feelings for men. I identify as bisexual. Also, quick aside, gender identity and sexual orientation are not related. They are two separate things. Okay, so I independently identify as bisexual, and I realize that I have an attraction to men, and that's something that I also thought was normal, that everybody liked men at least a little bit. So, who would have thought?
So
Who would have thunk it?
what do you think were kind of signs for you? Like, what allowed you to open up in your awareness to start to realize those differences? Or do you know like an age range when that happened?
So everybody's transition is different. I ended up transitioning a lot later than most people do. Um, Gender identity in the brain develops between 3 and 5. But the issue is for a lot of non-binary people specifically is that they don't know that the option of non-binary exists. So they just live their life as a man or a woman or whatever they're assigned at birth. And they realize that something's wrong somewhere in between. And eventually they realize that non-binary people have existed and that they are part of this group. So for me, what really well, in the trans community, we call it breaking your trans egg because, once an egg cracks, you can't really put it back together. What happened was there was like a math class. And so there was a math class and I was asked to write my problem up on the board. So the teacher was like, okay, everybody fill out a couple problems, do them on the board, and then, I'll talk about them like afterwards. So I do that. And then the teacher starts going around talking about everybody's. And then when she got to mine, she used they, them pronouns for the person because she did not want to, I don't know, give away my gender. And so when she used the they, them pronouns on me, I realized I liked it a bit too much to be cis. And by that point, I've already started to kind of break down some of the toxic masculinity, some of the rigid conformity, and whatever else. And yeah, that's kind of what started the rest of my transition.
Yeah. So when you were actually talking about age ranges, do you think adolescence is a common time for people to realize this for any reason, whether it be like puberty, growing up, that sort of thing?
I'd love to answer your question, but I think Danielle has something to say.
Yeah,
Or
let's
Marilyn,
yeah.
whoops.
Yeah. So I want to introduce Danielle. She hasn't been on before, but she is an NC State senior, North Carolina State senior. But I understand this is the internet and everyone here can be from anywhere in the world, and we honor that. It just so happens that we're out of Raleigh, North Carolina, so a lot of us that are working on this show are out of Raleigh, North Carolina. And Danielle is out of state and is a phenomenal human. And I'm delighted that she's going to be joining us here and there on the show. You want to say a quick hello, Danielle?
Before that, I've got a finger up.
Okay.
Danielle,
What's your
could you
finger?
please tilt your monitor toward you so we see more of you? A little more? Okay.
And just bear with us because Danielle was in class. And you got to do what you got to do, right, everybody? So you take care of business. So Danielle, you want to say hi?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks for welcoming me on late. I was just in class. I have the unfortunate circumstance of having class at 4:40 that ends at 6 o'clock. So, it is what it is, but I'm very glad to be here. So thanks, guys.
Good. So this is Ivy, right? And then
Oh,
Josh.
Hey guys. It's nice to
Uh,
meet you all.
Yeah, it's great. And so I just want to remind everybody, since I have the microphone at the moment, to please feel free to call in if you have any questions, 919-518-9773, or you can join us on Skype, and that would be at computers. That's plural, then the number 2K voice. And then you can also come into our live chat and ask questions, comment, whatever you like in there. Just put your name under the video, and we would love to have you in there as well. I do have one quick um, question for Ivy,
what's up?
which I think I find is really important. And I appreciate everything that you're saying so far because I'm learning. But one of the things and this is all new to me, okay? So if I make mistakes, I've given Ivy total permission to call me out. So you're using the word trans. Now this is maybe my ignorance, but I was under the impression someone who identified as trans was going through a sex, like a gender change, but that's not true. Anyone?
So
Go ahead.
yeah, so I think that the term that you're looking for is transsexual.
Yeah.
So that is an antiquated term for a transgender person, because transsexual implies that somebody would need to have like gender affirming surgery to identify as a certain gender. We now know that that's not true. So the new word is transgender. And the transgender umbrella really categorizes anybody who does not identify with the sex assigned to them at birth. So whether that be a person who was assigned male at birth who grows up to be non-binary, who grows up to be or who grows up to be a woman, you know? Does that make sense?
Yes, and
Does that
then
answer your question?
no, it answers great. And I just want to tell Danielle, our system, Danielle, since nobody can see everybody except for whoever's in yellow, right? That's who's broadcasting out. If you have something to say, put your finger up. That way, that we'll all know and we'll be quiet. Ivy. So transgender is the same as queer?
Um, Not necessarily.
Okay.
Queer is more in relation to the community as a whole. So if you are like either not if you are not cisgender or if you are not heterosexual, you identify as queer. So all transgender people are queer, not all queer people are transgender. So it's like, I think the best way to describe it is like how a square is a rectangle, but not all rectangles are squares. If that is to help, or if that helps.
Cool. All right. Well, I appreciate that. So I know Danielle, you just came, so I don't know if you have a question or you just want to listen for a few minutes and then chime in. It's up to you. Either way. You have a question?
No, not currently.
Josh, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So, going back to our previous discussion point, out of curiosity, maybe for kids that are still trying to figure it out for themselves, I know going through adolescence, going through puberty, it was even hard for me because at some point you kind of hit, I don't know if this is just for me or for all people, you hit a phase where you're really at that struggle point if you just have no clue where you fall under what you think you are, gender wise, sexuality wise. So, for maybe people out there who are confused, advice would you give your past self trying to figure this out?
Don't let rigidity culture stop you from being who you are. If you want to wear a dress, if you want to break your gender norms and do whatever you want, you're young and you have freedom to do it. You please exercise it, because at a certain point you may not have the same space and time to explore your gender. So whether that be like, if you really feel like this is something that's important to you and you're assigned female at birth, buy a binder or buy some looser fitting clothes and try to cosplay as a man, cut your hair short, if that's what you want to do. I feel like gender is such a beautiful thing to explore, and it can create such great art, and it can really help people discover who they are and function better in their everyday life. Because I know that for a lot of trans people, the part of your life where you don't live in the gender that you wish to be, it just feels like there's always something wrong and you can never place your finger on it. There's a couple of other like situations where that happens, but I know that for me, growing up, it always felt like I needed to try so hard to become a man. And I realize now that that was really just performance, you know? So question your gender, and parents, let your kids question their gender, because whether or not you want to believe it, you have no say as to whether or not your child is transgender. And
Yeah,
that's
and
okay.
adding on to that, how would you give advice either to yourself in the past or even other kids in that kind of situation to explaining it to their parents? Maybe even especially if they're in situations where they feel it's very uncomfortable or their like family's religion and all might interfere with that.
So obviously, safety is very important. For a lot of trans kids, coming out really just isn't an option. And that's the unfortunate reality. Some of them have to wait until college. And Luckily, I I was not really in that situation. There was certainly some conflict that I really don't want to get into, but generally things have been semi okay. I haven't been kicked out of my house, which is something that also happens. And it's really just if you know who you are and you're able to hold on to that despite what other people tell you, that's all that really matters. And you will find a time where you can live your truth.
So, how do you think that that benefited your life? I know you talked about it's really important to explore so you don't have like that nagging in the back of your head, something just doesn't feel
Mhm.
right. Once you finally were able to accept it, where did you notice like a significant difference? Do you really think things start getting a lot better?
I mean, yeah, my life has dramatically improved. I feel happier. I feel like I can really do what I want. And I feel empowered almost because now that that weight is kind of off my shoulders, now I can really focus on what I want. Like, I love math and I'm going to go like head on into a degree into math and specifically data science, hopefully go for a PhD. And I feel like I've just, in the time that I've really taken to explore myself and kind of after that I can move through the world with more I guess self-awareness, I think is a good way to put it. And also I feel like I just have more drive to do the things that I'd want to do.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. So, would you say that for kids who kind of are struggling in this situation, Ubby, that or right now that might actually be able to open up, would you tell them to go for it if they really think they can?
If you believe that you are transgender and you think that it's safe to tell people, or even if it doesn't even have to be for trans kids, just if you believe that you are part of the queer community and you think that it's safe to come out, tell the world because as much as times are scary for people like us right now, what we really need is each other and what we really need is community. What we need is more of us to show conservative lawmakers and whoever else that we will not be going anywhere. And that's the reality of it.
Yeah, so I you bringing up community actually reminded me of a point I wanted to touch on. We're both in high school right now, and in the past on this show, we've talked about how different and like how different, types of people with different interests, different kind of clubs, friend groups have different stigmas around them in a high school setting. Do you mind explaining how you think that this may have affected your high school experience or things you've experienced?
I've definitely experienced bigotry in my time in high school. I can say that for certain. I can also say that because I came out, I've been able to find a lot of joy. And so, really, if you are queer and some people are so prideful that they think that queer people are the work of the devil or people to avoid, that is not the type of person that you'd want. You want somebody who's tolerant and accepting no matter who somebody is. And if, for instance, like I try to be friends with somebody and they say something that's bigoted or transphobic, I won't speak to them because that's not okay. That's not right. And they don't deserve like another chance because they blew it. And, but on the other hand, my queer friends, other people who are tolerant, they are incredible to be around. Having that sense of queer joy and community and just ability to be yourself around people who are just like you, it's a feeling that outweighs whatever bigotry I can face.
So, if there are people who currently have negative stereotypes on people of like the queer community, the LGBTQ community, etc., and they're trying to understand now, maybe hopefully to make that change, what advice would you give them to like give them their own insight, looking at it from their perspective?
We're really just humans. Like, we are people just like you. There are there is nothing wrong with us. And this is going to be harsh, but maybe you should unpack where that belief comes from instead of projecting it onto a group of people that don't deserve it.
Yeah, that was
And
well put.
after you do that, I don't see why you would hate the queer community, because we're really just people. We like to kiss boys sometimes, and we like to put on fun dresses. And if that like really offends you, look inwards, please.
Yeah, all right, thank you. So, Ivy, do you know any like friends of yours that have currently been in your high school community? How they also kind of you don't have to bring anyone specific in, but how do you guys as a group kind of cope with any like hate or bigotry, like you said?
We turn to each other. Um, Hate and bigotry happens, and we know that it happens very acutely as queer people. And so, but the thing is that if you talk about your oppression or whatever else with a group of people that also feel the same thing, who face the same thing, you feel less alone. And that's a really good way of coping. Also, Marilyn, did you have something to
Yes.
say?
Well,
Yes.
thank you, Ivy. Yes. So how old were you when you came out?
I was, I came out multiple times, but let's go with 15.
Well, you started when you were when you were younger, correct?
I did not come out when I was younger, but I certainly had those feelings.
And how did you tell your parents?
I mean, I just told them. I just told, first I came out as bi, so I'm like, I'm bisexual, and parents know what that is. But when I came out as non-binary, it took a second for them to wrap their heads around. And yeah, that was a point of trouble.
Hmm. Danielle, do you have anything?
I just really appreciate your willingness to share this with us, Ivy, because I know personally, I grew up in a very conservative town in North Carolina, and I didn't have a whole lot of queer friends growing up until I came to college. And the friends that I did have who were queer in that town did face a whole lot of backlash. They faced a lot of hate. I had a friend who he's trans himself, and I worked with him, and our manager refused to use his preferred pronouns, and that was a huge point of contention in our work. It was a huge point of contention I had with our manager. It's a huge point of contention that he had with our manager. So I really appreciate you sharing this because I know how difficult it is, and just I've not experienced that hate, but to see people I'm close to experience that sort of hate, and homophobia and transphobia, it's really I really commend you for sharing that with us. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think that, yeah, I really feel bad for your friend. I Unfortunately, that's the reality for a lot of trans people. I know that I worked a job, and I don't think that this was exactly the fault of my coworkers, but it was very hard for them to wrap their heads around using they them pronouns. They were older, and so for whatever reason I was misgendered a lot. But honestly, I the reason why misgendering is such a bad thing is because it doesn't really hurt if it happens like one time, and it's, you're picking up like a coffee and they're like, "Thank you, sir." And I'm like, "Okay, yep, I can just walk off." But if it happens again and again, it's like a repeated kind of offense that just progressively feels like it annoys you more and more. And it can cause a lot of dysphoria for people like us. And seeing conservative, like CPAC speakers or Republicans talking about how, or even Elon Musk talking about how pronouns suck or something like that, it's hurtful because they're creating a culture war out of really nothing. And they're making pronouns to be such a big deal when they're really just a second grade English concept.
So,
So
Ivy, what do you think the feeling is comparable to, because some people, I think that these kinds of issues, they fall under a very similar type to even issues like racism, where someone's being stereotyped, things are being assumed by them by past beliefs. Do you know any feelings you think could be comparable for people that currently, are just like cisgendered?
Yeah, so um I think that, well, the feeling of being misgendered, at least for me, it's like a little spike of anxiety. So the best thing that I can compare it to is like that feeling where you can't feel your phone in your pocket for like a second, and it's like, but then it's like, oh, okay, it's there. We're good. So that's kind of how it feels to be misgendered. And even like I have a name that I no longer go by. My name is legally changed. You can't find it anywhere. But if I get called like the name that I was given at birth, that, that kind of feels like, the phone thing, except like way, way, way worse. Because I don't even know why it feels worse. It just does. And yeah, I think that that's probably the best way to describe how it feels, although I know that it feels different for every person. And I don't know how to describe how it feels to have like blanket dysphoria.
Yeah, no, that was a really great analogy. Um, Obviously, I know you brought up that it's really hard to kind of pinpoint the why on it. I think something else I was actually kind of curious about was in solving issues like these, society needs to make overall pushes to push forward. And do you think there are any popular figures today that you think are representing people that are non-binary, trans, and so on?
Um, do you mean like trans people or non-binary, or do you just mean like general people who are pro-trans?
I think in general, I even remember in a past conversation we had, I forgot their name, but there was like a talk show host you brought up before.
Mhm.
So if you know people
Yeah.
like that.
So Jon Stewart, he recently came out with a show on Apple TV called The Problem with Jon Stewart. I think he was another late night host. I forget what show he was on, but yeah, he comes out swinging in like support of trans people and specifically exposing the culture war that right wingers have manufactured around like the whole pronouns thing and stuff. And honestly, just seeing trans people in media helps normalize it. So like Hunter Schafer, who played I think Jules from Euphoria. Um, oh God, there was more people, but they're no longer coming to mind. But yeah, and I guess related to that, it's kind of like trying to see trans people as they are, as regular humans, because a lot of conservative media like Fox News demonizes them, you know, puts them or portrays them as men cosplaying as women or something like that, just disingenuously. And so it's really important to kind of learn and educate yourself and specifically look for examples of trans people just being people. So if you think of like, I guess there isn't very many positive headlines, but if you can find a story or a person that you know who knows a trans person and who actually supports them, or even if you know a trans person themselves, talk to them because you'd be surprised with how normal we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even when we had our first discussion, I really learned like so much more into getting insight onto what exactly like there is to know, because I think bringing up analogies of how it feels helps people to realize, we're all humans. When you brought up the phone analogy too about anxiety spiking and all, it's the exact same thing, right? If someone can relate to that, they have the human emotion to maybe understand kind of what about it causes people to be non-binary, be trans, for people who don't understand. And I actually also remember you also brought up things like your teacher unintentionally using the they them pronouns, and that kind of validated for you the feeling. So I do think it'd be really awesome to know about like what caught like the why, but it's also really hard. Danielle, did you have anything like you wanted to add or anything you wanted to know from Ivy?
I think you're doing a great job of asking questions. And Ivy, again, thank you so much for contributing. I'm really enjoying this conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, so Ivy, back to the point. I know you do a lot of work with like leading diverse like groups at your school. You have an organization, right? Or like a club that you kind of work with?
Yeah, so I'm the vice president of Coexist at my school. We kind of are like the governing body for like affinity groups, which are like, I don't know if you guys know about affinity groups. So they're like small little groups where people who are Asian American or Black or you know Muslim can come together and talk about their shared experiences. So we're like the overarching body that kind of preaches like intersectionality and understanding each other on like a broader lens and understanding how different marginalized identities bleed into their respective like or how different marginalized identities like stack on top of each other.
So would you say that oppression to the people of the LGBTQ Q plus community, queer people, etc., could be compared to racial oppression, like as two similar things?
I mean, I think that especially for like Black queer people, it stacks on top of each other. So Black trans women have a very, very low um, expected lifespan. I think it's about 30. And that's not okay. And so, unfortunately, the kind of racism and transphobia kind of work together to make somebody's lived experience, like, for lack of a better word, hell. Because there are so many ways by which they kind of intersect. So, for instance, um, when colonizers came to the United States back in 1500 or 1600s, a lot of Native American people were gender nonconforming. They were two spirited. But, the oppressors didn't like that. So they genocided them alongside, which was rooted in white supremacy. So there is like a little bit of shared history between the erasure of third gender people and transgender people and racism and white supremacy and colonization. So, and moreover, I feel like homophobia and misogyny are just two sides of the same coin because if you are somebody who does not like gay people, specifically gay men, there's a very high likelihood that you do not like women in the sense that you do not respect them as people because the way that they intertwine is a hatred for femininity. And so they hate like feminine men, but then they also expect women to kind of adhere to these feminine gender roles instead of recognizing their humanity. You know what I mean? Like,
So, so I have a question for you, and then I
yes.
want to ask Josh something too. When you mentioned about these trans Black women, what
Yes.
happened? You said that I mean, they have a shorter lifespan. What's going on?
So, because of the way that trans people and Black people are historically oppressed, these two things intersect. And for instance, it could be because of adverse health conditions and the inability to pay for healthcare. It could be because of drug use, because of being in this horrible situation. It could be literally being killed because you are trans or Black by police, like it could literally be straight up dying in a way that causes premature death, because trans people are at a very, very high risk for violence. And unfortunately, we have a lot of access to things that can make people violent and that can enable violence in this country. So obviously that will lead to Black trans women having like a lower span. Moreover, 1 in 4 trans children have committed suicide in 2021, I think, according to census data. And so suicide could also be killing Black trans women because of the oppression that they face.
Is there an age that this is like you said children? What age are we talking about?
So
Can
I
you
think
do
trans
it?
youth is below 18. So
Okay. There's a lot to unpack here.
yes.
A lot. And I really piggyback on Danielle's comments because, I don't know a lot about this. I'm learning and I want to know. I want to learn. I want to understand. And I really also appreciate your being open to talking about this because how am I going to learn if I don't learn it from you? I don't want to learn it from the wrong people. I want to learn it from the right people. So, Josh, I want to ask you something. I know you're a freshman, right? In
Yeah.
high school, and Ivy is a senior. So, based on what we're talking about, what do you see in school as far as this is concerned? What are you noticing? What are you aware of? How is it comfortable, uncomfortable? Give us your perspective.
So I think that there's definitely a stigma. When I see, to be 100% honest, especially in my age range, it's still difficult to find people that are non-binary and trans because a majority of them, maybe they're just not comfortable sharing. And past that point, I would never want to like assume anything. But especially among like LGBTQ communities in a school environment, I think that because teenagers specifically tend to stick to whatever they need to believe very easily, it's super easy for people to just get branded as like weird or different, if that makes any sense, in a lot of circumstances. Coming from someone who kind of knows people from all sorts of different groups at school, I definitely have seen people, just see somebody walk down the hallway, maybe just dress different or, uniquely, and they start laughing, they're chuckling, they find it really weird, because it's just so different to them. And I think the problem can root from two issues because A, people will either have a negative stereotype that these sorts that people that are LGBTQ plus etc have some sort of like flaws to them or something about them that will hurt them to get to know. I think that the biggest issue is teenagers just adapt really quickly to picking up whatever belief makes their life the easiest. And I guess for them, it's the easiest to just find somebody as being like different so they can feel normal. But the reality is, especially when you get to know people, everybody just has that completely different perspective on the world, even between two people. And I would definitely say that it is very difficult seeing because I wouldn't know how to fix it fully yet. That's kind of what part of this is for me is figuring out how to find that solution because I don't know what you would do. It's easy to get everybody to talk to each other, but then let's say teenagers want to have fun and they only have fun by making jokes. Cracking a joke here or there, whether it's a racial joke, a joke about people who are LGBTQ plus and so on, then at that point they brand it as just a joke, but you're still normalizing something being different about those people. So in a school community, and it goes the other way too. I have LGBTQ friends who might view, like cisgendered white guys as different or everything of that nature. I think it definitely comes down to getting to know people and understanding that the way I would like to put it is there's a distribution among everyone. You're gonna have the nicest LGBTQ people, and you're gonna have some mean ones that are jerks. You're gonna have the nicest people from all these different groups because we're human and humans have different traits. But it would never be because you fall under this group, you're suddenly like this. I think every group has a distribution of good people and bad people. So, in my opinion, if you really struggle to get along with a group, it's okay to be closed off from them as long as you're not hurting them because then everyone kind of wins. If someone approaches you from a group you don't like, be polite, be nice. I would say for teenagers, if they can't take the step to educate themselves yet, then the second best thing to do would be to just practice being at least polite. If a friend makes a joke about someone and it makes you a little uncomfortable, go ahead and try to politely tell them, hey, don't do that. And I would say, in the nicest way possible, if they really don't want to, then question if their ideologies line up with yours to be friends with somebody like that.
So when you are going through this and you are making a choice, how do you know when there's so many choices what the right choice is for you? Is that part of the experiment, sort of like I think Ivy, you said something that you alluded to that in the beginning. I think when you mentioned being binary, and then and also there was something you said in the very beginning, and I'm trying to remember what that was. But how do
It
you?
might have been about exploring like gender identity
Yeah,
and
maybe it was
exploring.
that. So I'm. How do you know at your age? I mean, how do you know where you want to go, who you want to be?
I mean, I don't know like who I'm going to be in 20 years, in the sense like I don't know what job I'm going to work. I don't know what career I'm going to fall into, but I do know that I will be non-binary 20 years from now. The reason that I know is because the same logic could be applied to cis people. How do you know that you're cis? You know, how do you know that in 20 years you won't be trans? And the answer is I've explored my gender and I realize that this is who I am. And so, fun fact, the part of your brain that develops gender, it fully develops between the ages of 3 and 5. So there's a certain brand of trans people who knew that they were trans before they went on, before they had puberty, and so they took like puberty blockers and gender affirming care, and so they grew up to look exactly like a cis woman or or like a cis man. And so I guess that's another thing, is that you don't know whether or not you haven't experienced or met a trans person. I may not be the first trans person you've ever met, you know?
Yeah, and adding on to that, Ivy, to that point with the brain and all, and bringing biology into it, how would you distinct? Because you a lot of like gender words, male and female, are also used from a biological standpoint to define like different organs and all. So how do you think in our modern culture, in the LGBTQ and trans and binary community, how do you think what terms like do you guys use to distinct biology from gender, or do you think they're the same thing, or like where's the correlation?
So yeah, we believe that, or I believe that sex and gender are different things. So sex is male and female, intersex. And then, you know, gender is male, female, non-binary, right? And that kind of is the distinction. Now, if you have affirming surgery and you are able to change your gender marker, or if you are able to change your biological sex, as in, because I feel like chromosomes don't really matter. It's really just, genitals and sex characteristics. So if you are able to get your surgery and, whatever, I would consider you as a female person if you're transitioning from male to female, or female to male, if you are. But I know that a lot of like gender markers, for instance, they say M or F, but it's really just like what your gender identity is, what you present as, because otherwise it just ends up with a lot of like people who look like women having like an M on their like driver's license, which isn't exactly accurate, or having an F on their driver's license, which isn't accurate. So
So, and I wanted to ask Danielle the same thing about NC State, but one of the so you said you will be binary 20 years from now.
I will be
What do
non-binary, yes.
yeah, what non-binary? Thank you. And I appreciate you correcting me, and I just want to tell people it's important. This is a new journey for me. May be old for you, new for me. I have no problem. And if I make a mistake, I'm making it because I don't know, and I am delighted that you are willing to share the correct language with me. because this is all new to me. What does this mean in going forward with like having babies? You know, you there's more choices today. You know, I didn't have a choice really that I knew of. So I was born a girl. I'm a woman, and that's it. I never even explored a choice. Not that I would want to, but I'm sure there's plenty of people like me who did not have that choice or knew we had a choice. So you have that. You have a lot of choice. What does that mean in like having babies in the future? If when we have a lot of your generation, um, trans, non-binary, what can you tell me about that?
I mean, a lot of us may adopt if we,
Okay.
do gender affirming care and we're no longer like biologically able to have children. And I also want to clarify that like trans people are by far like a minority in our population, like 5%. So I don't think that like we're gonna run out of cis children anytime soon or children from cis couples. Moreover, like the, there are stories of like, transgender men getting pregnant and so they're able to carry a baby to term, you know, and that's okay. So, and then as far as like what parents are going to call me or what children would like call me or what my child would call me, right now I think that it's probably going to be like Ivy, but you never know. I also think that having parents who are trans would be really good for a lot of children because that also models that being trans is okay. They don't have to worry about whether or not it's going to be safe to come out as trans because the only thing that they're really going to have to worry about is the outside world. And having like the family together to help you get the care that you need is really important for a lot of young trans people because if the family supports you like financially, emotionally, whatever, it's a lot easier to move through the world knowing that the people that you immediately live with understand you for you. And moreover, like if you're like, here's an example. Let's say there's like like a very young trans guy who's living with two trans parents. And so he goes on like gender affirming care, he gets HRT fines, whatever. Once he goes to, high school, he could just sign up as a man and go in and nobody would ever know. So
Yeah, and
having
I appreciate being able to ask some of these questions to you because I don't know. And when you think about have, and you're right, and you are right as far as the 5%, but I do believe it's going to grow. I think there's more people that have not come out and have not verbalized because of what's going on with, our conservative legislators and all the things that are happening. It's scary. So I think that there's more than the 5%. But I guess I never thought about it, but kind of maybe a little bit under the impression that if by becoming non-binary or trans, queer, that people lost their desire for children. Like it all went away with changing genders or whatever. But I am so delighted to hear when you said, well, we could adopt. I was like, yeah, sure you can. That's great. So
well,
thank you.
hopefully.
Yeah, well, hopefully, I mean, who knows anything? I mean, we only know what we know. Danielle, did
Yeah.
you have something?
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's a lot of misconceptions, especially with people where this wasn't a topic of conversation
Mm.
growing up or in a place in life where they weren't able to have this constructive dialogue. And I think that it's great, Marilyn, that you're curious and Ivy that you're willing to talk about it. And especially as somebody who's able to go to has a privilege of attending a university where this is a conversation that I'm constantly in and I'm constantly able to talk to a lot of my friends and explore my own gender identity. I think that it's a wonderful place to be in, and I'm glad that we're able to share this with more people.
Yeah, and adding on to that too, based off everything Danielle said, Marilyn said, with the last 10 minutes coming up, Ivy, I just want to know your thoughts. What do you think, in a more specific manner, are the first steps we should take towards deconstructing these problems? Like, obviously, in history, there was although racial oppression is still a predominant issue today, there was a time when it was so much more horrible. So, looking at that, if we could look back on our history 30 years in the future and this problem is a lot less prevalent, what steps do you think we would take now that could basically make that difference?
So, really, I think it's about understanding and dismantling the current systems of oppression. So, that includes racism alongside transphobia, because these systems of oppression and this oppressive system that we work under is something that is outdated, and it's something that has never been morally justifiable. But only recently have we been able to really understand the system and start to change it. So, for instance, I am a very strong believer that like this culture war is a way to, like, for instance, the culture war on trans people is a way for right-wing oil tycoons to get people to stop focusing on the reason why they're upset, which is really just capitalism. It is understanding that people are unable to meet their basic needs. They're living paycheck to paycheck. The environment's literally collapsing in front of our faces. There are a lot of bad things happening in the world, but the Daily Wire, Fox News, and all of their billionaire conservative donors want you to focus on trans people or some other small non issue to help them make more money and to kind of keep their business alive. So if you think about where all the money really lies here, it's preventing the spread of green energy and stopping oil. It's allowing people to be discriminated against so you don't have to pay them a living or fair wage, and just generally not paying people a living or fair wage. Otherwise, that'll cut into profits. That's not good for business. That's not good for shareholders, which is an innate flaw of capitalism. So, generally, I think that although I don't know if capitalism is going to go anywhere in the next 20 years, I would like to see it go, you know? And together we can build a society that's not run by war criminals, that we can support everybody on basis of however they identify, and understand that everybody deserves to have their basic needs met, like their healthcare, like their housing, like their food, like their water, like their access to education, and whatever else, because that is a human right, and that's something that we suck at giving to people.
Well, I think it's going to take the three of you because I don't think people want to listen to me much, but I do think it's going to take the three of you and all of your friends and your generation to really make a stand. I have one more question. Um, does a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, do they really know?
They may not have the words to describe it yet, but there's definitely something going on there. And they may not have, they may not know that being trans is a thing. I know that I wasn't a, I know that I didn't know that when I was 3, but as we start to learn about these things and as we start to create representation and teach children that it's okay if you don't identify with the sex you are at birth, and like, I want to acknowledge that detransition does happen, but it's very rare, and often for like overwhelming majority of the time that it happens, it's for reasons that are related to society as a whole and not because somebody isn't truly trans. So I'm actually of the belief that a lot of small children may know even if they don't have the words to describe it yet.
Got it. Phew, this is something. All right, Josh, Danielle, you got any final anythings for Ivy?
Well, obviously, thank you so much for doing this. We still have 5 minutes to talk, but I just really appreciate that you were able to like go all out there on being open because it's already hard for people to open up even in their own communities about this. So to be able to do that for an audience, it really does make the difference because that's how we kind of make that progress forward into the first steps of making that change among people in our modern day society. going back to solving the issue, what do you think are efforts for someone who really cares, maybe in school and all? What are little things they could also do to kind of help?
Okay. So, biggest thing is to tell your parents that we exist, tell your parents that we are people, and also to tell your parents to stop voting for conservative lawmakers. They are not making the changes that you think that you want. They are hurting your rights. They are hurting the rights of millions of people, and they only look out for their interests. There is a lot of money that outweighs whatever you could say to your politician. Vote Democrat, vote blue, and remember that even voting in state legislature really matters because a lot of small state legislature is where anti-trans legislation is proposed, and that's where it's passed. And so know that your vote counts even if you don't think it does, because you don't lose anything by sending in a mail-in ballot, but some trans person somewhere could maybe have access to the life-saving healthcare that they want. They may have access to live the way that they want. They may have safer schools to go to. They may have a brighter world to look forward to because of your vote. So vote blue, and also make sure to educate yourself on these things, and don't watch Fox News.
And do you think that in a school environment, what do you think? How do you think kids could just better their own social like actions?
Like, if you think that a trans person is weird, one, like, look into yourself and try to see why, because 99% of the time you think that it's 99% of the time it's transphobia. Once you unpack that, just talk to them. Just say, "Hi, I'm, Joshua, and I'd like to, and it's really nice to meet you." And remember that we're just people. We're not encyclopedias. We don't know everything, you know, and understanding and maybe coming together on like stuff that's so casual, like what's for lunch or something, could be the starting point to a bigger friendship where you can talk about these things. And once you understand and once you start bridging that gap, you can help bridge the gap for other people too.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I definitely know I think making that step in the younger generation with adolescents and all is one of the best things to do because eventually that just grows into the next generation and it goes on and on and on. So, as that gets passed on, I'm just really glad you're sharing for people to be able to actually hear about things like this. Since we only have a bit of time left, is there any like summary to your thoughts if you just had to let everyone know something that you really think they should take away with them?
Yep. Protect trans kids. I think that's the biggest thing. Trans children are living in the scariest time that they could possibly be living in right now. There have been 900 plus anti trans bills proposed in 2023. And if you ask any young trans person, it takes a toll on us. And it's your job as a cis person to use your privilege and to help us and to tell other people in your life that trans people are normal people and we're really just not what you think we are. We are just human, and our rights are being taken away.
Yeah, thank you so much for this, Ivy. I really appreciate you coming on today. It definitely was great to get like a new perspective, something new to talk about for everyone. So, Marilyn and Danielle, if you guys have any finishing thoughts, I'm love to hear it.
Got anything, Danielle?
I just want to say thank you again, Ivy. I know, especially in high school and being in such a small community that is often not a whole lot of diversity between students, just based off of where you live and how high schools in nature are just clustered in specific socioeconomic areas. I really appreciate you being so open about this because, from a perspective of someone who is attending college and a liberal college and being able to be in an environment where we can have open discussions about this and I don't have to worry about my peers judging me for it, or I don't feel judged by my peers for having these conversations. I really appreciate seeing younger people talking about it in their smaller communities as well, because it is such a prevalent issue today, and there's so much that needs to be done about it. So thank you.
Well, I thank you all for being here. This has been terrific. We're going to come back next month, the second Monday in the month. I don't remember what the date is, but we will be here 6 o'clock. If you have ideas for shows, you want to be a guest, just let me know. We'd love to have you. This is any story is a good one, right? Because I know that if you have a story, it's probably similar to mine as well. So come join us. And I want to thank Amnon very much for being our producer. And we'll see you all next month. Thank you so much for being here. Bye, everyone.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.